Who the fuck is this guy? Hey, I'm Toufic, and I'm a blockchain and crypto lawyer and managing partner of a law firm called Renault & Co. My background is basically that I became a lawyer, realized it sucked, and thought that that was the dumbest decision I've ever done. If you want to be a lawyer, strongly reconsider it. And it was only when I started to work in crypto that I really actually started to find my passion for the profession. I got into crypto because I'm originally Lebanese, and seeing what folks had gone through during the Civil War and also later, more recent times, they went through hyperinflation, corrupt intermediaries and banks, black market exchange rates, all the like. I really noticed how much actually having control of the asset in which you're really putting all your value into is so important, and giving it up to untrusted intermediaries could really be a big issue. It's sad what some of my family members went through in Lebanon, where folks lost their life savings. My parents went to the bank and they were like, hey, where did all our savings go? And they're like, yeah, sorry, it's not there anymore. Folks trying to pay for university, they have the money, they're not getting student loans, they have the full money, and the bank's like, yeah, sorry, it's not there. Or just limiting the amount of money that you can take out for transfers. And then with hyperinflation, your ability to buy anything just skyrockets, and the shortages of oil and pharmaceuticals and whatnot. So that kind of became a huge part of my kind of mission and purpose, which was to kind of build this and support companies that are building on top of Bitcoin and blockchain in general, so that we can have an ability for folks to really take back their power around whatever asset we decide to put all our value into. You work, you do all this stuff, and you put that value is translated into money. And if you can't trust the folks that are printing that money, holding that money for you, well, you're in big trouble. The work kind of morphed and became very much into a new type of interest over time, which is one around, I would say, governance and institutional design and network design. And one of the funnest parts about my job now is getting to work with these organizations called DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, where we're doing a lot of this governance innovation, right? These are like little mini network communities where everyone's just trying out new governance ideas. How can we actually govern in this, digital and intelligence generating state that we're living in right now? And, this type of innovation I think is really needed, right? Like if you think about it, the way in which we manage our society is built on really old information technology. Laws, written word, court systems, democracy, Congress, parliaments, whatever. You almost got to think of them as a type of information technology, because they are. And they are a type of information technology on a continuum that we have really surpassed, because this is tech that's been built in the 1700s. So if you think of it like that, we're really working on old tech debt, right? Like we're trying to build, and we've really surpassed from a social perspective this existing structure that has been in place for a really long time. And no one's really talking about kind of building that type of innovation, especially in the age of AI, where we're going to have intelligent machines that are going to be doing stuff autonomously. How are we going to be able to control that? How are we going to interact with that? And how are we going to want to interact with that and interact with ourselves in such an environment? So a big part of this channel is really to discover and have discussions around this type of governance innovation. I'm not necessarily saying that the state has to be a DAO or everything has to go on the blockchain or anything. I actually don't know, right? But I think we just need to give it a shot. We need to try, right? Because if the current state structure fails for whatever reason, or part of it fails, well, it would be nice to have, I don't know, another option, and an option that maybe is built upon the information technology of the 21st century. So that's really kind of the key part of what I really want to explore here, and why I feel I got a unique position trying to explore it, because I've been just working in these little petri dishes of experiments with DAOs for multiple years and getting to see all this innovation going on. And I'm really excited to be able to share this with you. And This kind of reminds me actually of the American Revolution, right? One of the fascinating parts of the American Revolution is how much of a goddamn experiment in democracy it was. Remember, at the time, there was no large-scale democracies that existed ever, right? And the prevailing wisdom at the time was that, democracies would only work in homogenous city-states. This was, promulgated by Montesquieu and others who really put forth this concept. And in a historical standpoint, it never actually was anything different. You had Athens as a city-state, you had Rome as a large, republic, and people say, well, Rome was an empire. It's like, hey, no. Rome as a republic was really just a small group of aristocratic few, and the Roman citizens and later the Italians around Rome that were able to vote within the republican system, not anyone else outside who were conquered, right? So even then it was a really small scale state that, had the ability to vote. And what comes to mind is really, the Federalist Papers, in specific Federalist 10, written by James Madison. James Madison obviously was a prominent lawyer, one of the key architects of the American Constitution and the fourth American president. And he put forth in Federalist 10 a intrepid concept that yes, Republican democracy can work on a large scale. And actually, it's to its benefit if it works to a large scale, because it helps reduce the factionalism that could develop in purely democratic systems. And what Madison was doing was not just opining on constitutional law or political theory. He was really in the business of institutional design and societal architecture, right? The principles in which were being espoused in Federalist 10 were really around that type of kind of consideration, right? Because you have to remember, law and society are interrelated. They're systems that feed and influence one another. So you can't have really one interacting in a vacuum without considering the other part, right? Like, a key example is we have, I would say, laws that are, affected by societal change. For example, in Canada, you had a Supreme Court case, which was called R.V. Bedford, which, 10 years prior, the Supreme Court said prohibition on a person's ability to sell their body as a form of legalized prostitution was constitutional. That was illegal in the criminal code. But 10 years later, it struck it down, that provision of the criminal code, as unconstitutional, illustrating the changing times and sentiments with respect to prostitution. And that's a key example of society influencing law. But law can also influence society. For example, it's quite customary in many places in the Western world where when the woman marries the man, the woman would get the last name of the man. Well, in Quebec, province in Canada, they actually banned your ability to take the male's last name. Now, it may seem draconian, but it has changed society, where now it's actually frowned upon to be able to take a man's last name in Quebec. And you don't have to agree or disagree with these policies, but they're just examples of how there is an interrelated system of law and society that play onto each other. And this is why this channel will, in effect, take a really broad lens, because it is a legal channel. It is a channel about institutional design, about societal architecture, about how we can actually build the society of the future in the incoming age of AI and technology that we're currently in right now. But moreover, it's about what are the social systems that we want to design, and how do we want to design it, and how can legal actually be the catalyst to create incentives for us to actually get the outcomes that we really want. And that's how I approach my work in any event, right? Approaching things from an extremely narrow legalistic mindset, I think kind of misses the broader point. So I'll give you an example. So I gave a talk about the legal risks for blockchain startups at some startup incubator thing this last summer. And the key thing was, to speak about the legal risks for these startups. And most people would go and be like, oh, you got to watch out for this law and be careful of that law. and don't do this, and don't break this law. And I kind of approached it in a different way. I approached it, okay, here's some good business management tips. And this is how you run a proper business. And this is how you make sure your customers are happy. And this is how you make sure your employees are happy. And this is how you actually scale a business. And everyone's like, dude, you're a lawyer. Why the fuck are you talking about business management? I'm like, well, the best contracts are ones you never see. And the only time you have problems is when people have problems with you. So the best way to reduce legal risk is to reduce your problems. And the best way to reduce your problems is to operate a good goddamn business. So that's kind of the approach I'm taking at a societal level. Let's speak broadly about what it means to be a human, what it means to live in this current society. Let's talk about the economy, politics, love, relations, and everything in between, because all that feeds into the institutional design that we want to see in the institutions that govern us. And then that has a reinforcing feedback loop upon all of us so that we can actually live in a society that we think is more congruent with human values. So like and subscribe, you're gonna miss out.